There was a wise king with 3 sons. As he got older, he had realized that he was going to need to pass down the reins. Now, usually speaking, it would go to the eldest or the next in line. However, this king wanted to give all 3 of his boys an equal opportunity to become the next in line. So he created a plan as to where he got all of his carpenters and construction people together, brought them out to a field, and said, I want you to create each of my boys the same size shed with the same access points and everything else. And I'd like this to be complete by next week. So the carpenters set out and they built each of his boys equal size shed and storage unit. As they finished, he gathered his sons and he brought them to the field. And the boys are looking at these 3 sheds and they're like, what the heck, has our father lost it? Or like, what's going on? He's finally lost his marbles. And the king turned to his boys and said, these sheds are going to determine which of you gets to be king. So now it really caught their attention and they're like, okay, now they're listening, right? He said, I'm going to give you X amount of dollars and you're going to go into the city and you are going to find whatever you can to fill these storage sheds from top to bottom, corner to corner, needs to be completely full. Whoever can fill your storage unit the first and the fastest will become the next king. So the boys are all like, oh, that's easy, then no big deal, okay? So they set out with their money and they run into the town. And the eldest son, who's always really quick to decision and really fast to make up his mind, he sets out first and he makes it into the city. And all at once, he notices these people with dump trucks and massive things unloading this water from these quarries. And they were transporting it into the city. And he immediately thought to himself, easy, that was the perfect thing. I already got it figured out. My other brothers, too bad for them. So he pays them the money. He goes out to the field. He summons his father and his brothers. And he says, guys, I'm already going to be the next king. So, sorry. And next thing you know, he snaps his fingers and all these dump trucks with these massive gallons of water come over to his shed and they begin to start filling it from the access points, and it starts filling a quarter of the way, halfway, almost 3/4 of the way, when all of a sudden the shed starts to leak and the water starts to seep into the ground and it starts to go from 3/4 to half all the way back to not even a quarter of the way full. And the father just looks at him and says, my boy, I'm sorry. You do not get to be the next king. And he's like, oh my gosh, I thought I had it. So now this leaves a 50-50 chance. Now you got the middle son and the youngest son. So they're like, okay, well, oldest is already done. That took care of that. So they set back out into the city and they're walking around. Now the middle son, he comes across a rock bed and a rock quarry. And all at once again, he says, I got it. So he pays all these men this money, calls up his father, calls up his brothers, brings them out to the field, says, I figured it out. I already got it done. So he snaps his fingers and here come these big dump trucks and they start filling his shed with just massive boulders, just all the way from a quarter, halfway, all the way to the brim. Stacked to the top, and he looks at his oldest and youngest brother and says, guess I'm king. You know, I just won the contest. And then his father simply says, son, just give me a moment. The father goes back to the same quarry and about 45 minutes later comes back. This time he has dump trucks filled with sand. The next thing you know, he starts pouring in the sand, and all at once the sand starts falling between the boulders and filling up the rest of the shed. And he said, son, I'm sorry, the shed was not all the way full from top to bottom, and I was able to fit a whole nother dump truck worth of sand in. So he's like, I'm sorry, my son, you do not get to be king. So now this left the youngest son to be like, oh, he's got all the time in the world. He can just, go out and relax and try to see what's out there. So the oldest and the middle are now distraught and like, oh my gosh, this is so stupid. I can't believe this challenge. Well, so the youngest son, he's back in the city and this is starting to get darker and darker, and he's walking around and he's talking with all the people and he's laughing and, he's taking his time because he doesn't really have much to worry about. So he's taking his time and all at once something strikes him and he's like, I got it. So right as the sun's going down, he summons his brother and he summons the king and he says, all right, guys. He brings him to his shed, and in the middle of the shed is this tiny little coffee table, and sitting on top. Well, and immediately the brothers start to laugh, and they're like, "What? That clearly does not fill the entire room. Like, clearly you lost. I don't know what you're trying to do." And all at once, the youngest brother, he takes out a candle, and he takes out a match. He sets the candle in the middle of the table, and he lights the match and brings it to the candle. And all at once, the entire room fills up from one side to the other, from one corner to the next, entirely with that light of the candle. And the father turns to the youngest son and says, "My boy, you have figured it out, and you will get to be the next in line. You get to be the next king." And he turned to his other boys and said, "You see, the lesson here is when you learn to be the light in a dark room, and when you learn how to be able to make people come to you and to be a great leader, is to find the positivity and to find the absolute best in just about any situation, and to be able to be that person that brings the light into those moments of darkness. And when you can learn to do that, that is when people will choose to follow you. And that is when people at their worst of times will line up behind you." Every one of us has that choice to be able to go throughout a day and either find the positives or find the negatives. And whether we choose to bring that light and that moment of happiness versus those moments of darkness, that is entirely up to each and every one of us. That choice is yours.